Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
It is Tuesday. We're so glad you're with us on the Three Martini Lunch. As of right now, Wall Street is not cratering. In fact, it got off to a pretty nice start. It's tempered a little bit as the morning went on, but hopefully days like Monday are behind us, although we're not promising anything. We're sponsored today by Stamps.com. Right now, Three Martini Lunch listeners can get a special offer that includes a 4-week trial plus free postage and a digital scale without any long-term commitment. Stamps.com. Click on the microphone at the top of the homepage and type in 3 Martini. Stamps.com. Enter 3 Martini as the code. And Jim, before we even get to our first martini here, I was at the dinner table last night having a lovely conversation with my wife and kids, and my phone buzzes, and I usually don't like to look at it during dinner, but looked at it, and literally it was a CBS News blast that said this: coronavirus cannot be cured by drinking bleach or snorting cocaine, despite social media rumors. And that's exactly what their tweet was as well. Jim, I think there are some people looking for an excuse to snort cocaine and possibly drink bleach for some unknown reason. Let me tell you, I don't know a lot about coronavirus, but I'm pretty sure doing either of those is going to do more damage than the virus itself.
You know, Greg, are they really sure about this? I mean, should they really be jumping to conclusions until they've finished the clinical trials on cocaine and drinking bleach? I mean, you know, as my former colleague Jonah Goldberg used to say, but how do we know Tide Pods aren't delicious? More testing. Don't jump to conclusions. That's what I say.
Well, there's always teenagers who will volunteer for something.
Basically, my guess is 100% of the people who drink bleach will not die of the coronavirus.
That's exactly right. Isn't there a teenage viral game where people are smacking their heads on the concrete now? I don't even know what it's called now, but
there's some sort of like nefarious Darwinian society trying to weed out the weak, the foolish, and the gullible.
Well, let's talk about coronavirus in our good martini. That's a novel concept here, so let's do that. As you know, Jim, we've talked about it. A lot of people trying to score political points on this. Trump's not doing enough. Trump's overreacting. Trump's not getting tested. Trump's shaking hands with people who are now self-quarantining. It's basically an onslaught of criticism, some more justified than others. There have been Democratic politicians from the federal level to Washington Governor Jay Inslee, where, of course, coronavirus is perhaps at its most virulent in the United States at this point, taking very public shots at the president. And you would think that other Democrats would probably follow suit, and a lot of them are. But surprisingly, one who is not, at least not publicly, is California Governor Gavin Newsom. You and I have said probably next to nothing good about Gavin Newsom over the years, but today it's warranted. He was having a press conference and he was talking about the cruise ship that had been floating off the coast of California while the coronavirus testing was going on. And then there was a question of where it would actually make landing and make port. And so Matt Gutman of ABC News, and I believe it's the same Matt Gutman who told everyone that all of Kobe Bryant's children were on the helicopter. He was suspended for that, but apparently he's back at work. So he tried to get Gavin Newsom to say something negative about the president. And Newsom, pleasantly surprisingly, was having none of it.
Over the past couple of days, President Trump has said that he would prefer if none of the passengers aboard these cruises landed on U.S. soil. Did he mention any of that to you in your conversation?
Yeah, we had a private conversation, but he said we're going to do the right thing, and you have my support, all of our support, logistically and otherwise. So before he made those statements publicly, I had a private conversation with him around 4:30 West Coast time. And he said everything that I could have hoped for. And we had a very long conversation. And every single thing he said, they followed through on. So I'm just not interested in finding daylight on those statements, because every single thing his administration, and it starts at the top, including the vice president, has been consistent with the expectation that we repatriate these passengers, and we do it in a way that does justice to the spirit that defines the best of our country and the state of California.
Jim, I'm sure there'll be a time fairly soon where we're back at it with Gavin Newsom, but this was about the most mature statement I've seen from a prominent Democrat since this whole thing got started. Good for him.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't know whether it's a sense of leadership, a sense of political maturity, a sense of personal maturity. But, it's not like our system of partisan politics is going to stop forever if we dare express cooperation over an ongoing crisis. Right? It's we're still going to have an election. We're still going to have a campaign. Gavin Newsom is going to have 1,000,001 opportunities to say, I disagree with President Trump. Here's why he's wrong. Don't vote for him, et cetera, et cetera. But a press conference while you're discussing what the state is doing about the coronavirus is not really the time and the place. that you really, let's focus on what's being done. And it's one of those things where this really should not be governors versus the Trump administration. This should be everybody against the coronavirus. And I would not be surprised if you have different people in different state, local government and branches of government having disagreements. But in the end, this is all of us against the coronavirus. That is the problem. That should be goal number one. And is it possible that Gavin Newsom does have an objection to some of those Trump statements? You probably, there's a good chance of that. But he knows that if he gets into that, then the story then turns into, Newsom denounces Trump during coronavirus. And you know what, guys? And while we're dealing with this, let's just all focus on the coronavirus. Let's just all focus on solutions. Let's all just focus on what works. Let's all focus on getting the best information to the people. And, it as you said, you and I have not had many nice things to say about Gavin Newsom over the years. I salute him. This is exactly what we need. I think, it's one of those things where, there comes a time where you got to put aside all that stuff and you have to focus on the actual crisis at hand. So, bravo, Gavin Newsom. That's words I did not expect to be saying in a circumstance like this.
Or ever, perhaps. But nonetheless, there it is. And hopefully that's a model for others. It's certainly the case that the president can snap right back, as he did with Jay Inslee. So everybody keeping their heads down and working to get through this is definitely the way to go. Let's talk about Stamps.com, because things need to get done on the business front. Maybe you had to cancel a trip to Grandma's house and you were going to send some stuff to her. The post office is still running, and Stamps.com is where it's at. And if you'd rather wish that you weren't at the post office right now waiting in line, you're not alone. And whether you're running a business or keeping up with your schedule, it takes a lot of time, and there just aren't enough hours in the day to get all this stuff done, and Stamps.com makes your life easier. That's why you need it. Anything you can do at the post office, you can also do at Stamps.com. Their on-demand postage means you can skip that trip to the post office. Plus, you can save money with discounts that you can't even get at the post office. Here's what it's all about. Stamps.com brings all the services of the U.S. Postal Service right to your computer. Whether you're a small office sending invoices, an online seller shipping out products, or even a warehouse sending thousands of packages a day, Stamps.com can handle all of it with ease.
Maybe you're self-quarantining. Maybe you just don't want to interact with people face-to-face as much as you used to. Maybe you're just antisocial. Whatever your reason, you can simply use your computer to print official U.S. postage 24/7 for any letter, any package, any class of mail, anywhere you want to send. Once your mail is ready, just hand it to your mail carrier. Or you know what? Just drop it in your mailbox. No hand-to-hand contact. That sounds even better. It's that simple. Time isn't the only thing you're saving. With Stamps.com, you can get 5 cents off of every first-class stamp and up to 40% off on shipping rates. Not to mention, it's a fraction of the cost of those expensive postage meters. And there's no equipment to lease and no long-term commitments. Stamps.com is a no-brainer, saving you time and money. It is no wonder that more than 700,000 small businesses already use Stamps.com.
And right now, 3 Martini Lunch listeners can get a special offer that includes a 4-week trial, plus free postage and a digital scale, all without any long-term commitment. Just go to Stamps.com, click on the microphone at the top of the homepage, and type in 3 Martini. That's Stamps.com, and enter 3 Martini, all one word, as your code. All right, Jim, let's move to our bad martini now. And Joe Biden and guns. We're talking about this again. Seems like it's a weekly occurrence. At least this month it is, because Joe Biden is campaigning in Michigan. We'll talk more about that in the Crazy Martini. But he was at a factory, I believe this was yesterday, and a factory worker confronted him about what the factory worker considers an anti-Second Amendment position that Biden has, particularly as a result of his interaction that being Biden's interaction with Beto O'Rourke at the Unity rally in Dallas last week just before Super Tuesday. Now, there's a lot of background here because Biden's on the factory floor and a bunch of other people are chatting nearby this conversation. But the factory worker starts by saying, "You're going after our guns," and Biden fires back.
You are actively trying to limit your Second Amendment right to take away from you.
Now, shush. I support the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment, just like right now, if you yell fire, that's not free speech. From the very beginning, I have a shotgun, I have a 20 gauge, a 12 gauge, my son's hunt. Guess what? You're not allowed to own any weapons. I'm not taking your gun away at all. You need 100 rounds.
So when you were in Beto and you said you're going to take our guns,
I did not say that. That's not true. I did not say that.
Okay, so the audio's tough there. So the factory worker says to Biden, "You're going after our Second Amendment rights." Biden says, "You're full of crap," and that's where the bleep is. You didn't use that word, obviously. And so the factory worker says, "Well, when you were with Beto, you said you were going to take the guns." And Biden there at the end, of course, says, "I didn't say that." Well, really, here's what happened last week in Dallas.
Ladies and gentlemen, el próximo presidente de los Estados Unidos, Joe Biden. Let's do it for Joe.
I want to make something clear. I'm going to guarantee you this is not the last you've seen of this guy. You're going to take care of the gun problem with me. You're going to be the one that leads this effort. I'm counting on you. I'm counting on you. We need you badly. The state needs you. The country needs you. You're the best.
And, of course, Beto O'Rourke wants to take AR-15s and AK-47s and other things off the streets. He also wants to limit magazine capacity and on and on and on. So here's the next part of Biden's conversation with the worker, where Biden says he's going after those dastardly AR-14s.
Wait. Take the AR-14s and what?
Okay, this is not okay. Hold on.
Here's the deal. Are you able to own a machine gun? I said, are you able to own one? Under the law.
Machine guns are illegal.
That's right. So AR-15s are legal.
How is that in a machine gun?
No, it's not.
Semi-automatic.
Yeah, do you need 100 rounds? Do you need 100 rounds?
In America with handguns, and there are what you call assault rifles.
So Biden points out that machine guns are illegal. So then he says, well, yeah, that's why AR-15 should be illegal. And the guy says, well, those are semi-automatics. And, oh, by the way, handguns kill a lot more people than so-called assault rifles. And so, Jim, Joe Biden getting along well with folks in Michigan, it seems.
Yeah, let me put it this way. When he goes on to talk about how he's going to take our AR-14s, if that means we get to keep the AR-15s, I might be cool with that. But what he does say, assuming that when he said AR-14, Biden meant the AR-15, then when you say I am pro-Second Amendment, but I am going to ban the most commonly owned rifle in the United States, I think there's a contradiction there. I think you've reached a point where at some point your definition of being pro Second Amendment and generally gun owners' perception of being pro Second Amendment is a division there. Now, I've seen quite a few Democrats insisting, people are going to love this. This shows that Biden is a fighter, and regarding the use of the S word, first of all, a whole bunch of guys in hard hats. I'm guessing they have heard that word before. I don't know if that's going to hurt Biden that much. I think obviously, Trump uses all kinds of language that has not generally hurt him. Although the thing is, if you want to have a contrast with Trump, if you want to say we, the Democrats, stand for something better, something more dignified, something more appropriate for the presidency of the United States, well, then maybe this does start to hurt him. I think just generally this plays into angry grandpa persona of Biden. And the people who already like him are going to like that. The people who don't like him are going to say, oh, my goodness, can you believe the way he talked to that voter? But it's the little, the saying the wrong kind of gun and insisting he didn't say it when he said he was going to put Beto in charge of the gun issue. Like it feeds into this narrative of Biden doesn't really remember what he said that long ago, and he's kind of vague on the details, and he kind of fills in the blanks when he's not entirely sure. This is probably a microcosm of what we're going to get from Joe Biden for the rest of this campaign. And I think if you're a Democrat, you probably don't have full-on buyer's remorse. I still subscribe to the theory that Sanders would hurt them in Florida for the Castro comments. It's going to hurt him in Pennsylvania. We're going to see what the strength of Sanders and Biden is in Michigan, and most people think Biden's going to win, perhaps by quite a bit tonight. So between the two that are remaining, Biden is the safer choice, probably, but he brings his own flaws, and I think a good portion of those flaws are on display right there with that exchange with the construction workers.
Here's the one point I think that Trump supporters would push back on, because in a lot of ways, of course, it sounds the same, but Trump usually doesn't punch down at voters. He would punch at Sleepy Joe or Crying Chuck or Nancy Pelosi or somebody else running for president or the media or NFL players, somebody at his level or somewhere closer to it, and not the average voter like Biden would. Again, I think the discourse in this country is at a point where nobody's really going to bat an eye at it too much, but is there a distinction worth noting there?
Put this in line with look fat, which apparently, Biden said he was starting to say facts are facts and he wasn't calling the person fat. You kind of wonder, how good is Biden when he gets challenged? And being a presidential candidate, you're going to get challenged morning, noon, and night, if not by people on a rope line. Or, by the way, you can also wonder in this current era of the coronavirus whether there should be rope lines. How much should someone who's 70-some be interacting with strangers in large gatherings? But again, how good, Biden is not nimble on his feet. How does he handle being challenged? Can he kind of laugh off criticism and things like that? And I don't know how good Biden is at that. We will see. But I think you're right. There is an element of punching down. Also, I was one other thing I just throw in there is that he makes a reference to shouting fire at a crowded theater. I hate that argument when people bring it up in the context of the First Amendment, because in that scenario, the danger is not the words. The danger is not the ones that are saying. It's the danger is the way people react to the words and people getting trampled and things like that. Nobody gets upset if you yell fire in a crowded theater if there is an actual fire, right? This is not really applicable to most First Amendment disputes. The fact that Biden's mind goes there to argue that our rights that are guaranteed in the Bill of Rights are not absolute indicates, I think, kind of the lazy thinking you're going to get in all this and kind of the rambling, jumping around mentality that he brings to these discussions. Again, I don't think that's necessary. Actually, there's one moment in the entire exchange that works relatively okay for Biden. That's when the Biden staffer tries to say, all right, thank you, guys. And Biden says, no, shush, shush, indicating he does want to continue this exchange with the construction worker. But all in all, probably, the Biden campaign will probably be pretty happy to get this exchange in the rearview mirror.
All right, let's go to the crazy martini now, but staying with Joe Biden, because, Jim, today is allegedly Super Tuesday 2.0. It's been quite a couple of weeks here for Joe Biden, obviously, going from the ash heap to, I would say, the presumptive nominee at this point after the big win in South Carolina. Everybody in the establishment moved to either get out of his way or rally around Joe Biden. He did very well on Super Tuesday, winning a lot of states that didn't even seem to be within the realm of possibility a couple days earlier. Now today we have, 6 more states. Idaho, Michigan, Mississippi, Missouri, and Washington are all having primaries, and North Dakota is having a caucus, so hopefully we get some results from them by the weekend. Jim, what do you make of where we stand now, where it's almost an afterthought? Everybody's looking at this 6-state slate and basically saying, I just assume Biden's going to win big.
Yeah, I think about where we were 2 weeks ago. Even Biden's, second place finish in Nevada didn't look that great. It was just at 20%. Yeah, he got some, you got delegates out of it. Everybody else was below 15, so he was doing okay. But really, Sanders was so far ahead, it looked like he was ready to cruise, even if he wasn't going to win South Carolina. South Carolina transformed everything. Peggy Noonan had this fascinating column last weekend, which basically made the argument, you could argue, out of all the people in the entire Democratic primary process, Jim Clyburn did more to influence the outcome than anybody else. And I think there's it's a plausible argument at minimum. I'm already, to give people a sense of a preview of what they can get on National Review later today or tomorrow. I'm working on kind of the I should emphasize, the political obituary of Bernie Sanders, not the obituary of Bernie Sanders. As far as we know, he's doing okay. Looks like it's going to be a very similar rerun to what happened in 2016. Bernie Sanders got some impressive wins early in the cycle. He definitely speaks for a chunk of the Democratic Party. Although I think we can also say that a chunk of his support in 2016 represented Democrats who just wanted an alternative to Hillary Clinton, who may not have been on board with the entire Bernie Sanders agenda, but who just kind of knew they didn't like Hillary, and this was either a protest vote or just I don't think this is the right choice for us type vote. I don't know if people are going to say, oh my goodness, what an enormous collapse of Bernie Sanders. And I kind of wonder if it's just a matter of he was always going to be in this. If you ask Democrats, do you like socialism? And maybe in particular, do you want the socialism as it is represented by Bernie Sanders? you're going to get 20-some%, maybe a third of the Democratic Party. That's not nothing. That's nothing to sneeze at. That's not enough to win a one-on-one race with someone who is a non-socialist, icon of the establishment, whether it's Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden. And I think this probably puts the socialist-minded Democrats in a real quandary. Maybe the Democratic Party as a whole in a fairly serious quandary, because clearly socialism is not popular enough to win a Democratic primary nomination, and if it's not popular enough to do that, it's not going to be popular enough to win a presidential race. It's not going to be popular enough to win most Senate races or gubernatorial races. It might work in a couple House districts here and there. You saw Democrats who were affiliated with the Democratic Socialists of America do reasonably well in the 2018 midterms, but that's not really what, particularly in Democratic primaries like AOC, but that's not really what built the Democratic House majority. The Democratic House majority was won by folks in the suburbs who were saying, look, I'm going to work with the president where I think he should. I'm going to disagree with the president. I'm generally anti-Trump, but I'm going to Washington to get stuff done, not to impeach the president. And we see how things have turned out on that front. Here's a problem for the Democrats. You can't totally ignore the socialists, because if they represent anywhere from a quarter to a third of the party, they're loud enough that if they stay home or they decide to vote Green Party or something like that, they can really louse up your attempt to get a majority, both nationwide and in a whole bunch of states. I don't know how the Democrats square this circle. I think Joe Biden, he's going to win the nomination, but he's going to have to figure out some way to win over the deeply frustrated Sanders supporters. And I have no idea what these folks are going to do at the convention in Milwaukee. I don't know how they react to the fact that for the second straight cycle they've lost. I don't think you can make the argument that the establishment has stolen the nomination from Bernie Sanders. What do you do when you feel like your movement and your ideas have hit a ceiling? Greg, I don't know. Maybe they can ask the Tea Party and those of us who are fiscal conservatives, folks like that.
Jim, I think we've talked about this once before, but as an exit here today, do you see parallels between this campaign and 2004, where Sanders was looking strong this year, Howard Dean was looking strong for a long time in the 2004 cycle, and then as soon as somebody else emerged as a plausible alternative that they could rally the party around, Kerry back then, Biden now, the entire party's just like, boom, and that's all over?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting. Besides the Vermont connection, and by the way, it's kind of interesting that Bernie Sanders and Howard Dean don't get along. They had plenty of disagreements, and at one point, Howard Dean compared Bernie Sanders to Ronald Reagan, which amused Bernie Sanders to no end. But you look at Howard, you think back to Howard Dean, and I represent the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party, and the idea that the rest of the party was a bunch of sellouts and a bunch of spineless wimps who are afraid to stand up to Republicans and things like that. I look at this and I think that this is always going to appeal, and we've seen this same kind of dynamic on the Republican side of, I'm tired of these establishment sellouts and rhinos. I represent true conservatives and all that stuff. And I guess the problem is that particularly be a presidential candidate, you have to be a coalition builder. You have to appeal to at minimum, I realize popular votes don't count, but you want to be close to 50% plus one of the popular vote, and you want to get the largest plurality. I keep saying largest plurality. You want to get either a plurality or a majority in as many states as possible. You got to appeal to a whole large group of people, and the problem is as you do that, what you stand for inevitably gets watered down. It inevitably becomes less bold. It becomes less sweeping change. It becomes more of a compromise, milquetoast, you might even say. But on the other hand, that's what you have to do to get to a majority. And that's a basic fact of political life. And there are a lot of people in politics who don't want that to be the case and who insist, no, if we just get purer, if we just compromise less, if we just stand for something that is maybe it seems extreme, but it's going to bring out all these new people. There's half the country doesn't vote, and they're just yearning for somebody to come out and say what we say. Bernie Sanders made that bet this cycle, and it did not shake out for him. And I think that, I think this should be a glaring sign for anybody else who comes into politics, completely convinced that they have the magic formula for motivating the half of Americans who don't vote, which, by the way, it's now less than half of Americans, particularly in presidential years. Turnout's been creeping up year by year. This idea of I alone am the one who can bring all these people out. Very rarely does it shake out that way. And, a hard lesson for Bernie Sanders.
Wow. Well, we'll see what happens tonight. I think we already know that it's going to be largely Biden across the board, but we'll see what the voters actually have to say. Jim, we'll talk about it tomorrow, I'm sure. See you then.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos, Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Don't forget our friends over at Stamps.com. Stamps.com. Click on the microphone at the top of the homepage. Type in 3Martini as your code. And also, please subscribe to the podcast. Leave us a nice review. And remember that those home devices can play us as well. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Join us on Wednesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.